Hey guys, I want to share a couple games of 100 Card Singleton because I've been playtesting a favorite deck of mine. It is a Grixis Delve. It is essentially a Grixis Midrange list. It's in a very, I'm going to show you that in a little bit too. We'll do two things in this. There's going to be a bonus session with some vintage. So, let's try it, I don't know. Yeah, what Sung and I are talking about is actually vintage related. There's a new Bazaar deck that involves Bazaar Vine, which I think is just god-awful. But more about that in a second. So let's talk about Grixis and 100 card. Grixis is in a weird spot in 100 card. So Grixis is... The good Grixis in this format is probably Jeskai, because it can actually play a much better tempo game. So what this deck looks to do is to play a tempo game through early control, but its role is fairly set in the beginning of the game because most of your threats are delve-based. So utilize delve-based threats so that you can assume an aggro control role in the mid-game at some point in time. Protect your threat after you've attrited most of their relevant cards with your counter magic and or creature kill answers. I have to look up into that. Anyway, so that's kind of how the deck works. The issue I have with it is that I think Jeskai is just better because Jeskai can generally choose to go into the aggro control role a lot earlier because it just has more efficient threats that are better, a better rate. Whereas this deck has to assume it a little bit later after it's utilized its own cards to attrit the opponent, i.e. Tombstalker. Being one thing of note. So, this hand's a little dicey, but, I'm playing it in the dark against Sung. I don't know what she's on. Well, actually, I think at this point I did, but I didn't choose the deck based on what she was on. I actually think this deck's bad against the deck she's on. She's on Blue, Red, Moon. So that's the other frailty of the deck, is the deck, has all the frailties of having a 3-color mana base, against, like, Blood Moons, Back to Basics, stuff like that. But it really doesn't gain all that much, over a deck like Blue Moon. So Blue Moon is kind of like the control analogy to Grixis Midrange. It's just better at controlling than Grixis Midrange is. And Jeskai is the better aggro control deck than Grixis. So Grixis is in this weird spot. I do think it's one of the most fun decks to play, because I think it is actually a pretty fair deck. At the end of the day, it's generally, it just accrues incremental value. So I do suspend the Ancestral Visions here because I think that's going to be central to winning this game. Opponent goes for a turn 1 Ponder. I see the island. I'm like, oh, okay, yep, it's Blue Moon. I miss my land this turn, which is not a huge surprise, but I go ahead and Portent, put the tapped land on top to draw into it. And then the plan is I'll probably just Thoughtseize next turn to get something out of my opponent's hand before this Ancestral comes off the stack. We'll go ahead and pause here just so we can look at the hand. So the hand is very inefficient. It's a Keranos, Torrential Gearhulk, Chain Lightning, Repeal, Island. So she really doesn't have much going on. So I just take the Jace, Architect of Thought, out of her hand because it's the nearest thing that she can cast. And it accrues card advantage. Whereas Keranos is pretty slow, Torrential Gearhulk's pretty slow, Chain Lightning's just damage, and I'm not that low in life, and Repeal is kind of garbage against me. Like, you're not going to repeal a Tombstalker realistically. So, play my tapped land. I believe I put another... I believe I put the Baleful Strix on the bottom of my deck, because I actually just want to draw land at this point. She plays out a Search for Escanto, which is upsetting, because I have to counter that. Like, that thing will eventually beat me, and this game's going to go long enough that I think I'm going to need it. So, I draw another Delve spell, which is a little bit unfortunate, because I'm probably going to try to get this Tombstalker down sooner. This is going to come off the stack, and I'm not going to get countered on it, which is good. And I end up finding my third land here. Go ahead and just Brainstorm, because now I have Banish Rain up, and I'm going to draw into this Hymn to Turek, and I know I'm going to draw a tapped land on the next turn. I do keep it because I think Hymn to Turek's going to be powerful in this matchup, and I leave up the Drain here. So draw into Crumbling Acropolis, just pass it again. I want to try to build up my graveyard a bit. I'm at 6 cards right now, so Treasure Cruise is definitely castable, but I think it makes more sense just to leave up Drain, especially as she has both the Torrential Gearhulk and Keranos in hand, which can do some sizable damage. So I go for a Hymn here, get the Keranos and the Repeal. Now I know she just has Chain Lightning, Torrential Gearhulk, and X in hand. Maze of Ith comes down, not a big deal here. Find a fetch land, and the Tassiger is actually more enticing than both the Treasure Cruise and the Tombstalker, because it's a threat, and it also builds up Delve for my other 2 Delve cards. So, pretty strong pickup there. I also want to leave up both counter spells here, because it just makes sense to be safe. She's probably playing like Back to Basics, Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, etc. I do go ahead and end step this. If she wants to hardcast her Torrential Gearhulk for no value to get basically a repeal, I suppose, then that's fine by me. I do find another Hymn to Turek here in Rise Fall. She goes ahead and casts out her Torrential Gearhulk for no value because she just wants to beat her. And I go ahead and just miscalc it, and she concedes there. So that's the game. So sideboard plan is pretty simple. We bring in our Blast package and remove some like deadweight cards. Probably actually remove some threats. So Direfleet Daredevil, a card I'm trying in this deck. Not a sideboard card, but probably should be. There's one of my board cards, though. Opponent plays a second land. I go ahead and just Inquisition here. Her hand and standby. Well, let me go ahead and pause it. So her hand, after seeing it, is Vendilion Click, Impulse, Condescend is what we can take. I actually opt to take the Impulse because the Impulse provides her with more hidden information after I've countered it, and then I'll just play around the Condescend. The Vendilion Click I'll probably counter with the Red Elemental Blast, but it does turn out to be a mistake as she mises pretty well here. So she just leaves up her mana. I kind of miss here, and I opt to just counter this, although I think... No, she would have taken the Red Elemental Blast, I'm pretty sure. So I go ahead and counter this. She draws for a turn, unfortunately hits back to basics, which is pretty much game over. The game goes on for a bit, but due to my much less basic land count, I'm pretty much screwed. So that's an island right there at a minimum. I can find an island, but my problem is this: like I need to find red mana because what my game plan needs to be is to like try to end step her in some way that she gets tapped low, and I'm able to get a Snapcaster off and then get the Red Elemental Blast to blow up the back to basics. But at this point, her mana count has gone up exponentially. It's possible that I really want to just do it as soon as I can, on her upkeep here, just to see if I can get it to work. I don't think it's likely to resolve. If she has one counter, I'm just kind of SOL here. So I go into this weird discard cycle, which is kind of what Back to Basics does, especially if we miss on lands. Draw an Izzet Charm, still no bueno, discard it. Basically any lands here that come into play untapped would be decent. Discard the Rise Fall, that's not going to be good this matchup. Well, Moto may have frozen. Or she considered for a long time there. Discard the Mystic Confluence here if I'm not mistaken. That thing's just way too inefficient. So, at a minimum, my Delve count is very high. Draw a Search here. I think I opt to cast Search out just to see if she'll counter it. She actually does, which is cool by me. I actually want this to get countered. She condescends it for 2. Hopefully it's not a power sink. That would be god-awful. And we're pretty sure we're dead at this point, but I'm just going through the motions to see if I can possibly get her. Go ahead and pass it back again. Go ahead and preordain here. Put these 2 to the bottom. Draw a tapped land. Oh boy. But I'm going to play it out because if my plan ever does work, then I should be able to get out of this. She plays down a Nimble Obstructionist, which is her clock at this point. Then plays down a Jace Vryn's Prodigy. We're steadily doing nothing. So this turn I attempt to go for it. I'm like, well, maybe I can, Treasure Cruise, get this countered, but she doesn't counter this. I was kind of hoping she would, but she's playing smart. She's not going to let me counter, or she's not going to counter that. I go ahead and just discard the creature kill. Jace is going to flip, and I have to like it at some point. It's going to happen. Take 3 more. Down to 10. So what I opt to do here is actually Hymn to Turek. I figure the Hymn will, in a minimum, draw out some sort of counter magic, but she just bolts me and then fetches and finds Price of Progress. Or she has Price of Progress here. So I opt to try to counter this because it does kill me. I'm dead on the spot from it. And then I actually reman my own counter spell just in case I find Force of Will. I have a blue card that's not Snapcaster to pitch because Snapcaster is necessary to stop the back to basics, which would still give me one more turn of attacks from the Nimble Obstructionist, but I would be tapped out of red mana at that point. But unfortunately, we lose this game in this match here. Going into Game 3 of Grixis vs. Blue-Red Moon or Blue Moon. So, pretty strong opener here. I like this hand, so I can play a tapped land turn 1, probably scry a land to the top, because I think I'm going to want to duress next turn and possibly leave out Bolt, depending on what she does. She does have some small threats that die to Bolt, like Young Pyromancer. I see the counter spell, and I'm pretty happy with that. It's a good tempo-based play. So her hand is Miscalc, Factor Fiction, and Mana Drain, plus a bunch of lands. So I just eat up the Mana Drain here. Go ahead and play a tapped land out and say, hey, do your worst. Draw Arc Trail, not the best. I go ahead and Rise Fall. I get very lucky. So this is the most interesting play of the game. I know the Rise Fall is bound not to be that great, but what I'm trying to do is actually get the miscalculation out of her hand. So if I get the miscalculation out of her hand, that means she's probably incentivized, if she doesn't draw well, to Factor Fiction on her turn, at which point in time I can counter Squall and then have Snapcaster plus Rise Fall or counter Squall up on the following turn. So I think the right play for her was to actually miscalc that, because I'm probably not going to tap out. And if I do, it leaves her the option to just Factor Fiction on her own turn. But I get exceedingly lucky. She doesn't try to miscalc it, and I somehow, out of her hand of mostly lands, hit both of her spells, which, that's the variance in those kind of cards. Hymn to Turek, is a hell of a card for that reason, right? Hit Collective Brutality here. She actually is drawn pretty well and drew into a Cryptic Command. Tries to bounce my tapped land. I just go ahead and counter Squall that and pass her the turn back. I know she's drawing off the top because she doesn't have anything else going on in hand. So I figured that it's probably smart just to counter that Cryptic Command and give her one less draw and keep my tempo up. The Bob does resolve, and the Bob is pretty much game. Finding the Blast there is not bad. Get in for 2. And now I have Snapcaster available with Counter Squall plus Hydroblast backup. I do go ahead and play this land out and tapped and just swing in there for 2. I'm not looking to attack with the Creeping Tar Pit here. Her being on a back-to-basics deck means that at any point in time she can just Mize well and end the game for us if we if we try to attack with the Creeping Tar Pit. She knows I drew the miscalc at this point. I go ahead and attack here, hoping that she'll block. She's smart and does not. She knows that any burn will finish this thing off, and that's just good value for me. I do go ahead and Arc Trail plus Firebolt, so basically 1.5 cards spent to get rid of the blocker. She casts on a Batterskull here, and I go ahead and find my Badlands, and then just disallow this. If she has drawn into something else good, then I'm probably going to, drawn into a land locker, then I'm probably in trouble. She knows I have the Dissolve now, and this is pretty much game over, because what I'm going to try to do here is go ahead and bolt her on her end step, and then snap bolt her, and put her down into lethal range. Go ahead and play out the Snappy. She ends up having Stifle as her last card. She stifles the Snapcaster, but she's still dead to the backswing of the Creeping Tar Pit, plus the Snapper and the Bob. And there's nothing I can draw on my deck that will do 13 damage to me. The most that could be done to me is 8 off of the... well, actually, there's a couple cards that cost 8. There's Treasure Cruise, not really 8, but 3 Delve cards. Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, and the Demon. I never remember the thing's name. Yeah, its name evades me. The card you saw in the other game that I used to win. Anyways, that was this first game of Grixis. I'm going to go on a quick pause, guys, and I'll pull up another match real quick. So this is round 2 today with Grixis. So I have a pretty good read that my opponent's going to be on either Merfolk or White Weenie. I really like Grixis against White Weenie, but that's like really its only great matchup. Like Green X and like White Weenie, it's pretty good against. Most other things, like it's not good in the control mirror because it has too many situational cards like Arc Trail and like Firebolt, and back to how it really can't in the early game assume the aggro control role. It has to do it later. That tends to give enough setup time to most control decks to overpower Grixis. But this matchup I do think is one that's pretty good, and the reason being is because this deck actually interacts 1-for-1 pretty well along the curve, and then it just accrues a couple incremental 2-for-1s, and after it gets a couple of those, it tends to win. So opponent is on White Weenie. They have a fairly fast start here, and get a 1 into a 2, and then 3-drop, I believe, Spectral Procession. I go ahead and Arc Trail, killing one of the flyers plus the 1/1 tapper. And I took the greedier line here, the more investment-heavy line, and played the Young Pyromancer out first, because I think this is probably the line that wins me more games. It allows me to trade basically free 1/1s for my opponent's actual cards. Drawing to Snapcaster here. Go ahead and play Snapcaster, cast back the Arc Trail, killing the first striker and another one of the flyers. And my opponent attacks again. I guess the unhallowed, whatever the flip loyal Cathar is, unhallowed Cathar, can't block, so it makes sense there. Firebolt finally goes to the 2/2 flyer, and my opponent just packs it in here. Like, they have 2 cards left in hand, but I've got Flashback on a Firebolt left. I've got, a lot of board superiority at this point, and like, even though they've done some early damage to me, and I've done a significant amount to myself, they're probably not going to win, especially with an active Search for Iskanta, and then a Creeping Tar Pit, which can attack for 3 additional damage each turn. So if they drew land here, they're just like, they're off of it. So this deck does have a pretty strong sideboard plan to support it in this matchup, to include Massacre, Pyroclasm, Whip Flare, and Virtue's Ruin. It may have like one more card. Maybe like Forked Bolt. I can't remember if Forked Bolt's main in this deck. I'll go ahead and preordain turn 1 here. Find some great cards on top. Firebolt plus Toxic Deluge, which I think is going to do a lot of work this game. Opponent goes ahead and taps my island with a Rashadan Port here. I just go ahead and play a tap Steam Vents and say go to my opponent. Opponent plays out History of Benalia. This card is very powerful, but I just opt to get down my Dark Confidant, and I bolt away the first Knight. So I spend half a card for basically a third of a card. My plan here is to get an attack in and then Toxic Deluge. So Bob has already pretty much paid for himself. He drew me a land card, didn't do me any damage. I think it makes sense to do this. And it also means the History of Benalia does nothing. On the next turn, it just kills itself, basically, and there's no +2/+1 to all the Knights. I do go ahead and get Tombstalker down here. Opponent plays out another Soldier and then cast a Mirran Crusader. I go ahead and counter the Mirran Crusader here because I don't really want to fight against that. And then my opponent plays out a Spectral Rider, which can attack past the Tombstalker. Drawing a Bolt, which is a very solid draw for the turn. I go ahead and attack the Elsbeth if Moto will catch up. And I'm obliged to bolt it here because I don't really want to leave Elsbeth around. It can just do a lot of damage out of nowhere. I play out the Search and then say go to my opponent. Get hit for 4 down to 11. Opponent plays down Thalia, Heretic Cathar, taps my red mana. I go ahead and resolve my Snapcaster, tapped of course due to the Thalia Heretic Cathar. Target Lightning Bolt, and then because my opponent's tapping this at the cost of 2 mana, I just spend the mana to blow up their unblockable threat. Go ahead and search for Iskanta here. I actually put Ponder into my graveyard. That's probably more debatable, but I think, at this point in the game, I really just want to find a way to close the game. I end up hitting instead Demonic Tutor, which is very potent because it gets me Virtue's Ruin, which means that whatever they play this turn, as long as it's not a Planeswalker, is going to die, and I'm able to accrue essentially, I would say 2.5 for 1 advantage, plus a lot of tempo advantage on the board because I'm able to attack for 7. And deplete, close to half their life total. Opponent draws for the turn and sees nothing, and then goes ahead and packs it in. So the sideboard plan, I think, is very strong in this deck against White Weenie. And again, because it can interact very well along a curve, it doesn't need as many sweepers in it. It's got I think 2 sweep, or correction, at this point 3 sweepers in it, but typically speaking, it only has 2 sweepers in it at most when the deck's in standard configuration. So this is Grixis. It's a deck that I think is very fun. I think it's a challenging deck to play because of the reasons I mentioned. I think it's essentially a worse Jeskai deck to play aggro control, and I think it's a strictly worse Blue Moon deck to play the control role. And you definitely vacillate between both roles, but it's just fast. It's less fast to make the transition as opposed to Jeskai, and it doesn't have the protections that Blue-Red Moon has against non-basic hate, and then just the dearth of counter spells. Plus, generally a combo flourish in the form of Kiki Jiki and or Splinter Twin on some nonsense threat. But the deck is very cool. It's very fair. No cool combos. Just grind. Just a grinding deck. That's all it does. So, I promised I would show you guys some vintage content, so we're going to show you this interesting deck that my opponent's playing. So I'm on Paradoxical Outcome, Storm. No clue in the dark what my opponent's on. This hand is not good, but I think it's keepable in the dark, just due to the power of Sensei's Divining Top. And if my opponent's blue, this is likely to eat a Mental Misstep, which is okay, I suppose. Opponent plays Bazaar, so I put him on Dredge. Then I see Hollowed One and Vengevine in the graveyard. So I draw pretty well and hit a Lion's Eye Diamond, which I think is going to be potent here, especially with Sensei's Divining Top allowing me to kind of smooth out my draw. Opponent does have a Riftstone Portal in the graveyard, so they're able to cast down birds and then hit me for 8 damage here. I do go ahead and keep my top. I have basically Soul Ring and Merchant Scroll on top. Take 4, draw into Merchant Scroll, play out all the artifact mana. Go ahead and fetch here. Find a Paradoxical Outcome, and in response to my own Merchant Scroll, pop the LED. Probe. See, there's garbage in my opponent's hand. Just a couple lands and a Birds of Paradise. Replay on all the artifacts. Go ahead and Windfall, and continue to just go ham with this deck. So. Yeah, this is game. My opponent should have conceded a while back, but they're going to make me go through it, which is cool. You get to see how this deck works in very high rate of speed because luckily I can play this deck relatively quickly, and Moto's replay of it is lightning fast. So if you're not familiar with Paradoxical Outcome, basically you have a shit ton of artifact mana that is free or makes mana the turn it comes into play, and eventually, due to the use of Paradoxical Outcome, which flips things back to hand, you can essentially use PO, Paradoxical Outcome, to make mana and also generate Storm Count and to draw cards. So we go ahead and Mind's Desire for 41 here, hit the Tendrils very early, and my opponent finally packs it in when I'm Mind's Desiring for my whole deck on turn 3. So, my take on, and I didn't really want to show this for Paradoxical Outcome, but my take on this this weird kind of spicy, like survival-esque, Vengevine Hollow One deck, I don't understand it because I feel like, yeah, you get to play stuff like Hollowed One main deck. You get to play, stuff like Squee, Goblin Nabob, which is card advantage with Bazaar if you have enough of them. You get Basking Root Wallace. So, to some extent, I suppose it plays around, what hates out Dredge already, which makes it probably halfway decent against, the big blue decks. But it's strictly worse against, the good combo decks of the format. Because this deck that my opponent's playing is just not a good combo deck. It's just a slow combo deck that I guess in some ways can outvalue the blue-based decks and may be able to race the stacks list. I think it depends on who wins the flip, to be frank. I do think it is exceedingly slower than Dredge. I think Oath probably has a leg up against it, and I think hard combo like the deck I'm on right now, Paradoxical Storm or Dark Ritual Storm, just blows this deck out of the water. I suppose they probably board in some number of Mindbreak traps. But, we have stuff like Defense Grid, which I believe do leave in this matchup because I figure they're going to bring in some Mindbreak traps in order to stop me. They're not a consistent enough deck, or they don't have enough blue cards to consistently play a card like Force of Will, so I figure that's really their only out to it. So what I end up doing in the board plan is I believe I bring in 2 Flusterstorms, which I find I often bring in, and take out some Preordains. So game 2, this is this is again like a very explosive start for my opponent, like probably one of their better starts. My hand's a bomb waiting to go off. So like any piece of artifact mana, and I can pretty much do it all on the first turn. If you're not familiar with how this deck works, like basically what my game plan is to Mox Sapphire, Lion's Eye Diamond, or correction, Mox Sapphire, Mana Vault, Defense Grid, float one, and then play out a Mox Opal, and then I need one more mana to go ham and actually Wheel of Fortune. In response to Wheel of Fortune, I plan on ditching the Lion's Eye Diamond, likely to make blue because I figure my chances of drawing like Paradoxical Outcome is a lot higher than drawing just the straight tendrils off the top. So my opponent again leads with Bazaar here, and they end up, I believe, ditching 2 Basking Rudies. So Rudy Toots comes down, 2 of them, and a Hallowed One. So they put a lot of power into play turn 1. I draw well. I draw into Chrome Mox, basically Chrome Mox or any land. Chrome Mox is better than any land, though, because it means I can still hit Academy, and my opponent just packs it in. So this is the thing. Like, this deck, to me, is like strictly worse than Dredge, because one, it doesn't get a chance to play Force of Will, which Dredge can, especially with Prized Amalgam now in the format. Like, you can play that card, you can play Force of Will, and very consistently use it. You can also play Mental Misstep, which it would have been good here, because if it hit my Mana Vault, like, this whole sequence of play, this whole play sequence just, like, goes to shit. You know, putting 6 power into play on turn 1 is probably good enough in, like, Modern, maybe good enough in Legacy. It's probably okay against like the fair blue decks of the format, or like the big blue control decks of the format. But against speed combo, or basically, I consider speed combo just basically an aggro deck. I just feel like this deck is like can't play against it. Like, it doesn't have an out to it. Sure, you can bring in the Mind Break traps, but like if the person who's playing the Storm deck is savvy, they're gonna leave in crap like their Defense Grids, even though like Defense Grids kind of a brick. I mean, it's mana. It's not even mana neutral. It actually eats up mana. It essentially eats up 4 in a paradoxical outcome sequence, which can be problematic when you have tighter sequences. Not that I think this hand is bound to have tight sequences. I think it's going to be pretty lenient in how I sequence it. Drawing 7 with 3 floating blue and not having made a land drop. Yeah, I'm like probably 85% to win. Opponent probably should let me see, but they were probably just under and over it. So anyways, I guess someone probably 5-0 with this. That's what I was talking to Sung about, because I was like, why am I seeing this deck all the time? I've seen it like 3 times. I don't know, guys. I think the deck's bad. Anyways, these are just some random musings. I really wanted to kind of get the Grixis deck out there a bit more. I suppose I probably should do a deck tech on it again at some point in time. It hasn't changed significantly in recent history, but I'll pull it up real quick and we can kind of walk through it. Yeah, it's certainly not this. That's another Grixis deck, but not really Grixis. It's more like 4-color check pile. So, I like to call this deck Grixis Beauty because it is one of my favorite decks to play in this format. I think it's just a fair deck, and it's good to play like because the games tend to be interactive. So basically, you have a best of Grixis list here. Your mana base 37 lands. You do have the man lands in here because it's a value base. It can play a value based strategy. You have generally the best of removal. Mystical Tutor, pretty fair in this deck. Generally speaking, it's going to get your Mystical Confluence, possibly Force of Will. I've used it to get Cryptic Command to tap them out before, but generally speaking, it's going to get Treasure Cruiser Dig Through Time over here on the far end. Best of removal, best of draw, best of counters is basically what you're looking at. As far as threat package goes, fairly light, only has 12 creatures, but Thing in the Ice, Snapcaster, which generally actually does kill quite a bit in this deck. Manlands, Dark Confidant, Dire Fleet Daredevil, a new ad. This card could possibly come out. It's better in a controlling meta. Young Pyromancer plus Baleful Strix. 1 draws you a card, 1 is just a cruise card advantage. Liliana, she's just the best of, and this card does a lot of work against other control decks, and it's very good against Midrange as well. True Name Nemesis, this card's truly a beating. Vendilion Click, also just a kind of a powerhouse card. And then Jace the Mind Sculptor. And then at the top end, we have the Delve threats, which are Tombstalker, Gurmag Angler, and Tassiger. So that is the deck. Basically just the most efficient interaction removal, and then it accrues incremental advantage. So it typically tends to be a 1-for-1 deck, which means it's harder to accrue value. But the way you do it is through cards like Hymn to Turek, Kolaghan's Command, Grim Lavamancer, Firebolt, Rise Fall, Jace, obviously, Dismiss, Factor Fiction, Mystical Confluence, Tassiger, TC, Dig Through Time. So generally speaking, you're only going to be up like 2 or 3 cards against another deck, and you're ideally utilizing all of your interaction to go 1-for-1 with them, and then using the 2-for-1 advantage cards to just slowly grind them out. So it's a very fun deck. Sideboard has some power hosers against White Weenie, to include Massacre, Virtue's Ruin, Dark Blast, Inquisition, because sometimes you want that extra discard. Forked Bolt is in the sideboard. Clasm, Whip Flare against White Weenie or just any Weenie aggro list. You have the Blast package over here. This deck cannot play Chill because it runs too many red cards to interact with red deck wins along a curve. Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast just good against the other blue decks. And then Spellskite against red deck wins. This deck has a lot of bad matchups, to include basically most control decks beat this deck. Like Blue-Red Moon, I think, is a hard matchup. We did manage to win that one that we showed. I think Esper Miracles is a bad matchup for this deck as well. I think Red Deck Wins is a bad matchup. I think it's good versus White Weenie. I think it's, generally speaking, good versus Green X. Anything with Blood Moon in it, it's not as good against, though, because, it can win the game sometimes. Like, generally, them just having an I win button in their deck can be enough, especially in a format that, where Demonic Tutor's legal. There's a lot of tutors that can help you get to what you need to get to. So anyways, this is Grixis in 100 card. Very, very fun deck. If you want a very artful deck, like a deck that is very skill intensive, that's a fun deck to play, but sometimes you just lose with this deck because it just has so many bad matchups out there. I don't think it's the best deck at trying to do what it's doing what it's trying to do. I think you're just better off playing Jeskai than you are Grixis, but it's certainly very fun, and I always have a riot playing this deck because it always offers you a lot of unique decisions, and the way it wins is very incremental. So there's no like big combo flourish where you just get your splitter twin and just win on the spot. Like, you need to really play for each card that you've got and try to grind as many cards as you can until you get to a position of dominance, which makes it a fairly inefficient way of winning, but again, fairly artful at the same time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this random or meandering set of musings on both 100 card and on Vintage. I guess, again, someone 5-0'd with that silly deck. I just don't think it's good. Don't play Basking Root Wall and Vengevine and Vintage, guys. I say that, now it's going to win Vintage Champs or something. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this small set of 100 card games and some random Vintage. Take care now and enjoy.